Hello. So I was going to run this via Zoom, but it's had a little bit of a hiccup. So I'm currently mid-changing tech stack. So bear with me just one hot moment whilst I kill my music signal. I have it all set up nicely, and as per usual, I now cannot find the right window um, to make this a little quieter. So here we go. Pause that. So, thank you so much for your attention today. We are going to look at upfront contracts. And the reason that we are looking at this is because it is a really lovely tool to keep everything on track and keep your deal mastery going. So, we're running a little late. Over the next half hour, I'm going to walk you through upfront contracts, why they're important, and how they support deal control. In future editions, we will be live and on Zoom, so you'll be able to unmute and ask any questions. If you have questions as we move through, please do use the comments box. As I'm juggling a few things, it's likely that I'll come back to you after that call. During the conversation, just note down anything you have and I will come back to you. So looking at our agenda, what upfront contracts are, why they work. We'll then dive into the 5 key elements that effective upfront contracts have and how to implement them in your sales process. And then if you do come across objections, what they're likely to be and how to get around them. So to provide you with a little bit of context, I spent 10 years in digital marketing, building my career in sales, account management, and partnerships, before switching into personal development and enablement and helping other people with their careers. I worked as a skills trainer and a sales coach, then as a professional development coach for a software bootcamp and in enablement for a hyperscale startup. All of this is to say that I have sold myself, I've trained salespeople, I've created scorecards as to what good looks like, and I've listened to hundreds, if not thousands, of sales calls. An upfront contract is just one element of a great sales technique, and let's take a look at why. So next, we're going to look at the what of an upfront contract and the why behind them. So if you've had yourself ask the question, why did my deal stall? There's probably a number of reasons, and I'm quite sure that they could all be categorized as unanticipated disruption. So the problem that we're looking at nailing with an upfront contract is really getting rid of unclear expectations that lead to uncertainty and then bloating on both prospect and seller side, wasting time on unqualified prospects who don't really want to progress, difficulty maintaining the conversation. So you get to the end of that call and you're like, what did we even discuss? We spoke about the weather and loads of other things, but I don't have my qualification criteria nailed. And then getting rid of the endless follow-ups, because actually by the end of that meeting, we've got buy-in into the next step. And that starts with the very first moments of a call. So what is an upfront contract? I've taken this definition from out there in the internet, but I like it, so we're running with it. It's an explicit agreement between you and your prospect about the process, the outcomes, and the expectation of your meeting. So it really does create alignment and keep everybody on track. They are the very first part of a successful meeting, but you might want to use elements of an upfront contract throughout the call. This recontracting is often known as framing. So what is the benefit for you as a salesperson, and why do these matter? Well, for you, it helps you maintain control of the sales process. A buyer may have bought lots of software. They might have bought a whole host of tech, but they haven't bought your tech. So this is able to give them insight into what is the next meaningful step. You can qualify prospects faster, and we'll look at why that is and the psychology behind them in just a minute. But it will reduce your overall sales cycle, and we know that time kills all deals. There's also huge benefits of this for the prospect. Number one is they're really clear on what to expect from the call. You're not going to spring something on them that they're not expecting. So knowing that there's no surprises and no hidden agendas allows people to be more open. And you're showing respect for their time and decision-making process. And I know there is an irony to that one. I've got started a little late today. So let's look at the psychology behind an upfront contract. This is why they work. If you ever feel like you've been locked into a conversation where you just don't trust the other person's motives, suddenly you realize that you haven't really listened to a word because you've been so preoccupied by what do they really want and why are we having this conversation, that you realize there's been a pause where they've asked you a question. That's what we don't want to do with our prospects. So having an upfront contract reduces uncertainty, and that is a core human need. It establishes you as a credible professional. It creates buy-in and therefore mutual accountability for both parties, and it sets decision-making boundaries. All of this means that both you and your prospect have more psychological safety in that conversation. This means that they are more likely to answer those business and budget questions and be a bit more honest when it comes to discussing their pains and their challenges. All of that means that you get a stronger discovery, a stronger read. They're more open to saying, actually, no, it's not right for us right now. Or you have enough information to take that call and get people out of your sales cycle. I think disqualifying a lead is almost as important as qualifying them in. So let's look at the components of an upfront contract. Say there are 5 key elements. First, stating that time boundary. Second, confirming what you're due to talk about in the time you have together. Number 3, obtaining permission. Number 4, stating what your ideal outcome is, that next step that you're pushing towards. And then number 5, gaining that accountability. So let's look at those really clear time parameters. This is an easy step. You heard me do it at the beginning. We've got 30 minutes on the calendar today. Does that still work for your schedule? Or do you have a hard stop at the top of the hour? Do you have a hard stop in the half hour? So the best practices here are to state the time limit, get verbal agreement, and then reference in on that, and you'll see when we bring it all together how you can do that a little later. That means that if you've got a half-hour call, you're making sure that you've got time to get those questions in, time to get your pitch in, and time to cover off those next steps. To that end, map out the journey of the meeting and get clarity on what that agenda is. An example script. Today, I'd like to understand your current challenges, your priorities, share any relevant solutions we have to determine if there's a fit. Is there anything else that you'd like to cover? You might add a softener here, such as let's leave as pals, or let's leave as professional contacts, or perhaps I'll check in again in 3 months. But the best practice when mapping out your agenda is to keep it short and sweet. 3 or 4 points, and that's it. Make sure that you include your points, and also, if you know what they want to get out of the meeting, theirs, but leave space to gain an agreement on that agenda. Ask them if there is anything else that's missing, that if they'd like to make any edits or amends to that agenda. Step 3 is permission seeking. So we want to get buy-in on the process and know that they're okay with what we're about to do. Would it be okay if I asked you some questions about your current situation to determine how we can help? And here we want to directly ask for permission. We don't want to beat about the bush. I've talked about connected and human conversations, and I will talk about different preference styles. And this really plays to people who are pragmatic, knowing they know what's coming up and you're being sharp and straight to the point. Pause and wait for verbal confirmation that they are happy to move forward, and acknowledge the agency that the customer has in this process. Actually, if there's some questions that they're not in a position to answer, this gives them the opportunity to say so. And it's this getting buy-in on the process that you might want to use throughout your sales cycle to recontract throughout the call. That's the part that's known as framing. So this might sound something like, thank you so much for telling me about your overall objectives. In this next session, I'm going to ask you a few questions about your marketing, what you're doing right now, and where you'd ideally like that to be. That's how you would use this as a frame to set up the next set of questions and ultimately move your call to its destination in the time that you want. So it's a great way for time management. So step 4, I call this sharing the ideal outcome. This is defining what the success criteria is before you begin. The example here is, by the end of our conversation, we'll know if there's a fit. If there is a fit, we'll discuss next steps, and if not, we'll part ways amicably. Does that sound okay to you? So in here, I have left define next steps in, but it's a little generic, so you might want to swap that out for something which is closer to the next step in your sales process. That might sound like, oh, we'll introduce you to an expert who can help you evaluate us further. We'll schedule a demo in to clarify how we can help. Or if you are a kind of 1 call close, 2 call close, very short sales cycle business, it might sound something along the lines of, if we are a fit, we can get you upgraded to the best fit plan for you. That could sound incredibly punchy, but it is best practice, because what we do want to do is be ultimately explicit about what those outcomes might be. We want to include room to move forward, but also we're not holding our prospect captive. So we want to cover the negative scenarios as well and let them know that it's okay if they don't want to move forward. What this does is it sets super clear expectations for what the next step is. And to that end, part 5 of an excellent upfront contract is that it drives mutual accountability. I am a huge fan of mutual action plans. You might also know them as joint execution plans. In my time, I have developed some pretty meaty documents for complex sales that have kept everybody on track, but a map can be as simple as a few bullet points in an email, and that all starts with a verbal walkthrough, because we don't want to shock our prospects into agreement. Queuing this upfront, right in that upfront contract at the beginning of the call, lays the groundwork for gaining that buy-in again at the end of the call. So an example of what this might sound like is, if we determine there's a good fit today, would you be comfortable making a decision on the next steps before we conclude? And again, the wording here is next steps, so you might want to swap that out for, would you be comfortable moving forward to a demo or upgrading to the right plan before we conclude? So again, be as specific as possible in the commitment that you're asking for. Be clear about what you're going to do and your own commitments, and then document these after the call. Again, bullet points, or if it's a little bit more complex, then you might want to move that to a shared table of some kind. If you have a very complex sale and you're expecting it to span months, then maybe you just want to share that a bit at a time so you don't overwhelm your prospect. So let's look at how we can bring these 5 elements together. I've got 3 examples here. I'm going to walk through the first one in detail and then I'll speak to the other 2 rather than reading them word for word. So the first one, think of this as your discovery call script. Hi Dave, thank you for making the time to speak today. As I mentioned in the email, we've got 30 minutes in the diary for this call. Does that still work for your schedule? Confirm the meeting agenda. Great. I'd like to propose an agenda for our conversation if that's okay with you. By the way, that's your first element of permission seeking. We'll spend the first 10 to 15 minutes understanding the challenges that you have around bringing what you want into being. We'll then take about 10 minutes to share how I've helped similar people and use the final 5 minutes to determine if there's a fit between your needs and what I do. Is there anything else that you'd like to cover today? Pause and wait for a response. If there is a fit, we'll discuss concrete next steps. If not, we'll conclude the call with no pressure. Does that approach make sense to you? Perfect. By the end of the conversation today, my goal is for us both to have absolute clarity on whether we should continue the conversation. If we both see value in moving forward, then I'll send a proposal within 24 hours and schedule a time to review. If either of us determines that it's not the right fit, then we can part ways amicably with no hard feelings. Does that sound fair? And one last thing before we dive in, if we do identify a strong fit, would you be comfortable receiving a proposal before we conclude the call? So here we've stated our time boundaries, we've confirmed the agenda, we have absolutely sought permission to move forward, outlined the proposal as the next step, and then hopefully gained commitment to receive a proposal if it sounds right. Looking at a follow-up meeting, we again want to make sure that we've confirmed that time barrier, and then this is a continuation. It is part of a process. It's part of their buying process and it's part of our sales process. So we do want to loop back to what we heard in that first meeting, what we know to be their issue, and have a thread that weaves through it. We've gone into seeking permission, and the nature here is slightly more defined. And we also alluded to delays that might arise because there's now other stakeholders involved. We've outlined the outcome to move forward, and this is really like, can we get agreement on a contract and move that forward? And then looked at that mutual accountability piece. So the next steps that they would outline at the end of the presentation. For me, I think this is a bit woolly, so I would allude to exactly what that next step should be. And then lastly, you might want to use this if you then have an internal stakeholder meeting. So the example here is that an internal champion has taken this up a level to the economic buyer or whoever else needs to be on that buying committee. So in prep for that, we are absolutely seeking permission again. We're running through the agenda and it is time boxed to keep everybody on track. If that department head is the economic buyer and they're concerned with ROI, we've got that nod into what is in it for them. Why will this meeting be a success by their own criteria? And that is expected ROI. Here in our outcome, we're moving through to secured contract stage. And then here, we're trying to gain that accountability by a set date. Therefore, we have that expectation of expediency, that expectation that we're moving through with as few delays as possible built into our wording. Not only that, but it gives us a chance to review that, and if there are problems with that timeline, have that open, have that honest conversation about how that timeline should adjust, which means that you as a salesperson don't end up committing to a close date you can't reach. So let's look at the impact of brilliant upfront contracts. Firstly, the key benefit is clear communication, and that clear communication allows you to flesh out unexpected interruptions by making them more expected, and ultimately makes it easier for you to forecast business. In terms of the way that you work, you can change a 45-minute meandering conversation into a 30-minute clear discussion. You're reducing the number of follow-ups and hopefully getting rid of those just checking ins by having a really clear decision by the end of that meeting as to what the next step is. And if you have worked with me in the past, then you might be aware of the BAM-FAM, so booking in that meeting from a meeting. And rather than having unclear next steps, you can get defined, committed actions, which means that you're not just checking in, you're following up on whether they had a chance to XYZ, meet their stakeholder, review their current stack and see where they fit in, review the demo, get those red lines addressed. Whatever it is not just checking in, it's a meaningful action for both of you. So that's all great. What if you are going from a standing start where really you might set a loose agenda at the beginning of the call, but you kind of like what you heard today and you want a bit of a plan to implement it? I would say take these 5 steps. Firstly, take some time to reflect on what you do right now. What works and what do you think can be tightened up? Then create some guidelines around the different types of meetings that you run, whether that's discovery and qualification, demos, contract reviews, negotiations, that sign up and set up, depending on the remit of your role, the handover to CS or onboarding. So what would you ideally want to bring in as a meeting structure? Try out with colleagues, your manager, mentors, get a feel for it, and then run a small batch test of 3 prospects. Consider what feels sticky, and it might all feel sticky at first, but it will soon become natural. But step 5 is really take time to review what happened with those 3 test prospects. What do you want to keep? What do you want to refine or change? Good luck finessing your deal control. Let me know how it goes. So let's look at handling objections during an upfront contract. So you might hear a couple of objections as we move through. We're being very, very definitive in what we ask for in an upfront contract. So to some people, that might bring up that first objection of, I don't think I can commit to a decision today. And that's absolutely fine, because depending on your sales cycle, you might not even want a decision that day. So make sure that you are running through that process of objection handling, whatever process it is that you have, that starts with acknowledging that concern without freeze, flight, being defensive. It then gives you an opportunity to dig in a little bit and clarify their misunderstanding. When it comes to an upfront contract, there's always going to be a benefit to them. So you really want to pull out what is that benefit, but know that you need to adjust if necessary. So if it is fact they can't commit today, then take it back to, actually, we're just looking to make sure that you've got the necessary information to proceed. We want to determine if there's enough value in this for the next step, and then ask that question, check in, would that be reasonable? We want to make sure that they feel okay and that they feel like that objection has been answered and solved in some way. If they need to consult others first, then fine. but maybe you can get that buy-in that they will introduce you to those stakeholders. So you're introducing that point of multi-threading to make sure that you can get the right people on that buying committee to know about what you do. Perhaps they just want an informal chat. And again, it's kind of diffusing that to make sure that the buyer knows that you're not rushing them through the process. This can be an informal chat, but you want to make sure that it is valuable to both parties. And to that end, if they feel like they're being rushed, then let them slow that down. Let them know that you're being respectful of their time, that actually this is about people knowing where they stand in the process, and you're really happy to adjust your expectations and adjust the timelines to match their decision making. Again, we're respecting their agency to walk away from this and to move at a pace that is comfortable. And in that, we'll hopefully get things moving a bit faster because we're not applying pressure tactics to no end. And as always, I would remember that some objections are buying signals in disguise. They want to know how it fits into their world. Some, and the objections that an upfront contract really helps with, are a plea for clarity. They really don't understand exactly what's going on, either in the selling process or with the technicalities of your product. Some are about sussing out how your solution will fit into their world. So you'll hear some of that in the processing. And then, of course, there are some objections that indicate that the prospect isn't right for you. They're not ready to buy right now, or perhaps they don't fit your ideal customer profile where you thought they did. So it's always about maintaining that respect and checking in that they feel like the objection has been heard before moving on. So in summary, I love an upfront contract. It creates stakeholder alignment by ensuring everybody knows why they are in that meeting. It also honours the agency of our customers, which you've heard me say quite a few times, but it ensures that they have a voice in how the process is rolling out and they can amend the agenda, amend the focus of that meeting if they wish. It keeps your deals on track by setting out clear expectations of what the journey of the meeting is and the journey of the buying cycle. And it helps to remove uncertainty. It drives accountability because we seek permission to make sure that they are happy to move forward as agreed. And it gives a clear reason to follow up beyond the check-in. I think most importantly for me is that it creates psychological safety by making sure that there's no hidden agendas. And that enables a far more powerful, connected conversation, far more honest, where you can really get to what are the pains and the challenges that they're facing right now, so you can better understand whether you're well placed to meet those challenges and how. But as always, don't forget that you may need to adjust your plan if that is what is best for both parties. So I have moved through this deck a little bit faster than planned due to the delay, and if you were able to stick with me, then great. If not, then this will be available on LinkedIn as a replay. But in honor to honor you and thank you for your attention, I would like to offer you the gift of my time, and that's in the form of either a complimentary coaching session on whatever you want to cover, or a work-life workshop. So if you have been puzzled over an issue for far too long and you want to get clarity on how to move forward, or you want to take a step back and work out how to make your weekdays work a little bit better for you, then please do take me up on this offer. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can do so by either finding me and sliding into my DMs, by emailing me at hello@michelleanthony.co.uk, or going straight to my calendar and booking some time in at michelleanthony.co.uk/meet me. Thank you so much for your attention today. I appreciate every single one of you. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments or DM me, and I'll come back to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much. And that is everything that I have to cover today.